What if the quiet, loving woman who gave up everything for you was secretly one of the richest people in the world? For 7 years, Maeve lived a simple life, hiding her billion-dollar identity for the man she loved. She traded boardrooms for bake sales, couture for clearance racks, all for a husband who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone. When he cast her aside for a wealthier woman, he thought he was upgrading. He had no idea he just discarded a diamond for a piece of glass. This is the story of how a hidden heiress, betrayed and broken, unleashed her true power and came back to burn his world to the ground. To the outside world, Maeve Black was painfully ordinary. She lived in a modest, two-story colonial in the sleepy Boston suburb of Dedham, a town known more for its historic charm than its proximity to the orbits of the ultra-wealthy. Her days were a quiet rhythm of tending to her small garden, volunteering at the local library, and preparing elaborate meals for her husband, Rowan Black. She drove a dependable 5-year-old Honda, clipped coupons, and her greatest indulgence was a weekly latte from the local cafe, The Daily Grind. She was sweet, unassuming, and utterly devoted to the man she had married 7 years ago. Rowan was the center of her universe. He was handsome, ambitious, and possessed a charisma that could charm the most hardened cynic. He worked as a mid-level financial analyst at a respectable but unremarkable firm in downtown Boston. To his colleagues, he was a man on the rise, sharp and driven, but held back by his humble circumstances. He often lamented his lot in life, speaking of grand ambitions that felt laughably out of reach. "If only I had the capital," he'd sigh to his work friends over cheap beers, "I could be running this city." What no one knew, least of all Rowan, was that the woman he came home to every night, the woman who darned his socks and meticulously managed their tight budget, was not Maeve Black, the orphan she claimed to be. She was Maeve Vanderbilt, the sole heiress to the Vancorp conglomerate, a global empire with holdings in technology, real estate, and energy, valued at over $200 billion. Maeve had met Rowan during her final year at Harvard, where she was studying art history under an assumed name, desperate for a taste of normalcy after a childhood suffocated by tutors, bodyguards, and the cold, calculating world of high finance. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor Vanderbilt, had been brilliant but distant figures, more at home in a boardroom than a playroom. They had been killed in a private jet crash when she was 18, leaving her in the care of her formidable grandmother, Augusta Vanderbilt, in the sole inheritor of their vast fortune. Overwhelmed by the weight of her inheritance and the prying eyes of the world, Maeve had crafted a plan to escape, just for a little while. Rowan, then a business student on scholarship, was everything her world was not. He was passionate, saw her for her, and seemed unconcerned with wealth or status. When he proposed a simple life, away from the glittering pressures of the elite, Maeve saw it as a romantic fantasy come true. She believed she had found a man who loved her, not her name. And so, with a heavy heart but a hopeful spirit, she made a choice. She put her entire fortune into a blind trust, accessible only by a complex series of protocols known to her and her family's most trusted lawyer, Jasper Flint. She told Rowan a fabricated story of a lonely childhood in a forgotten orphanage and embraced her new identity as a woman with nothing but the love of her husband. For 7 years, she played the part flawlessly. She found genuine joy in the simplicity, in the anonymity. Watching Rowan strive, she felt a sense of pride. She believed she was supporting his dreams, that their love was a fortress built on a foundation stronger than money. But cracks had begun to appear in their fortress. Rowan's ambition, once a quality she admired, had curdled into a bitter resentment. He grew tired of their modest life. He started making snide remarks about her simple clothes, their budget-friendly vacations, and her lack of connections. "Did you see the ring on David Chen's new fiancée?" He'd comment after a work event, his eyes gleaming with a covetous light. "Must be 10 carats. Her father is a shipping magnate from Singapore." He would then look at Maeve's simple gold band, a symbol of the life he now disdained, and his lip would curl in a faint sneer. He started working late, attending networking events that left him smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. He became distant, his touch infrequent and perfunctory. The easy laughter that once filled their small home was replaced by a tense silence, punctuated by Rowan's heavy sighs of dissatisfaction. Maeve felt the shift deep in her bones. A cold dread began to pool in her stomach. She tried to talk to him, to bridge the growing chasm between them, but her gentle inquiries were met with irritation and accusations. "What is there to talk about, Maeve?" he snapped one evening, throwing his briefcase onto the dining table she had so carefully set. "We're stuck. We're going nowhere. I'm drowning, and you're content to just tread water." "I thought we were happy," she whispered, her heart aching. "I thought this was what you wanted." "I wanted a partner," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "Not a housekeeper. I need someone who can help me, someone with resources." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and sharp. Resources. It was a word that had defined her entire life, a word she had run from, only to have it thrown back in her face by the man she had sacrificed it all for. She looked at Rowan, at the stranger standing before her, his face twisted with a greedy ambition she had never truly seen before, and for the first time in 7 years, she felt the ghost of Maeve Vanderbilt stir within her. The game she had started as a romantic escape was about to turn into a brutal war, and she was the only one who knew the true power of the weapons at her disposal. The final blow came on a crisp October evening, the air carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. It was their 7th wedding anniversary. Maeve had spent the entire day preparing a feast, a recreation of their first date, handmade pasta, a rich bolognese sauce that had simmered for hours, and a bottle of Chianti she had splurged on. She wore a simple blue dress he had once said was the color of his favorite sky. She waited the table set with their best china, candles flickering, her heart a fragile mix of hope and apprehension. Rowan arrived home 3 hours late. He didn't even glance at the meticulously prepared dinner. His face was flushed with excitement, his eyes shining with a manic energy she didn't recognize. He tossed a thick, cream-colored envelope onto the table, where it landed with a soft thud next to the uneaten breadsticks. "What's this?" Maeve asked, her voice small. "That," he said, pulling at his tie, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips, "is our future, or rather my future." Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were divorce papers. The sterile, legal language was a brutal counterpoint to the romantic dinner she had prepared. The words blurred, but the message was clear. Irreconcilable differences. No fault. A clean break. "Alex, I don't understand," she stammered, looking up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and pain. "Our anniversary—" "Oh, Maeve, please," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be so naive. Did you really think this was working? This small, pathetic life? I'm destined for more. I have been given an opportunity, a real one, and I can't have you holding me back." The name on the legal documents, the petitioner opposite her own, was a name she had heard him mention with increasing frequency, always with a tone of reverence. Victoria Rothschild, heiress to the Rothschild banking fortune in North America, a woman whose picture was a staple in the society pages, always dripping in jewels and couture. A woman of resources. The pieces of his recent behavior clicked into place with sickening clarity. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the scent of Chanel No. 5 clinging to his shirts. He hadn't just fallen out of love with her. He had been actively replacing her. "You're leaving me for her?" Maeve's voice was barely a whisper. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of ice piercing her chest. "Leaving you? Darling, that implies we were on the same level to begin with," he said, his cruelty absolute. He began to pace the small living room, his movements suddenly too large for the space. "Victoria understands me. She understands ambition. Her father, Charles Rothschild, is prepared to make me a senior partner in his new private equity venture. This is the big leagues, Maeve. This is where I belong." He finally stopped and looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her simple dress, her tear-streaked face with undisguised pity. "Look, I'll be fair. The house is mortgaged, but there's a little equity. You can have it. You can have the car. It should be enough for a woman of your simple needs. Think of it as a severance package for 7 years of service." 7 years of service, not of love, not of partnership. Service. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. He saw her as an employee he was now downsizing. The love she had poured into their life, the sacrifices she had made, the identity she had shed, it was all worthless to him. He hadn't just broken her heart, he had invalidated her entire existence. "I gave you everything," she said, the words catching in her throat, thick with unshed tears. Rowan laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of any humor. "You gave me nothing, Maeve. You had nothing to give. That's the entire problem." He picked up his briefcase, not the worn leather one she had bought him 5 years ago, but a new, sleek aluminum one she'd never seen before. A gift, no doubt, from Victoria. He paused at the door, turning back to deliver one final crushing blow. "I hope you find some quiet little life for yourself," he said, his voice laced with condescending magnanimity. "Maybe you can work at that library you love so much. It suits you. Just sign the papers. It's better for everyone if we do this quickly and quietly." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Maeve alone in the flickering candlelight. The smell of the bolognese sauce she had so lovingly prepared suddenly seemed nauseating. The beautiful meal was a monument to her own foolishness. He thought he was leaving a penniless orphan in his wake. He thought he was shedding dead weight to soar into the stratosphere of the elite. He had no concept of the storm he had just unleashed. In that moment, as the last vestiges of her love for him died, something else took its place. The hurt was still there, a raw, gaping wound. But beneath it, a different feeling began to smolder. It was cold, it was hard, and it was utterly unfamiliar. It was rage, a Vanderbilt-sized rage. She stared at the divorce papers on her dining table, the legal instrument of her humiliation. Quietly and quickly, he'd said. She picked up her phone, her hand surprisingly steady. She scrolled through her contacts past the local plumber and the dentist, all the way to a name she had not called in 7 years. The screen glowed with 2 words, Jasper Flint. Her thumb hovered over the call button. The woman who made the call would not be the heartbroken wife in the blue dress. It would be the billionaire heiress he never knew existed. The game was over. The war was about to begin. The first 24 hours after Rowan left were a blur of hollow-eyed shock. Maeve didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears, a vast empty cavern where her heart used to be. She moved through the house like a ghost, her home now a museum of their shared lies. Every object was a painful artifact. The chipped coffee mug he used every morning, the worn armchair where he used to read, the photographs on the mantelpiece of a smiling, happy couple who had never truly existed. She took a black trash bag and with a cold, methodical precision, swept every picture, every gift, every last trace of him into it. It wasn't catharsis, it was an exorcism. By dawn, the house was stripped bare of their shared past, as empty as she felt inside. She finally allowed herself to look in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her eyes, usually so full of soft warmth, were shadowed and haunted. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, careless ponytail. She was wearing one of Rowan's old, faded t-shirts as a nightgown. This was the woman he had discarded, the weak, simple, penniless orphan. He had created this version of her, and he had destroyed her. It was time for Maeve Vanderbilt to come home. She showered, the hot water a blessed shock to her system. She dressed not in her usual modest attire, but in the one emergency outfit she had kept hidden in the back of her closet, a pair of tailored black trousers, a silk blouse, and a pair of simple but elegant leather flats. They were remnants of her old life, a contingency she had prayed she would never need. Then she made the call. The phone rang only once before a familiar voice, crisp and calm as ever, answered. "Jasper Flint speaking." "Jasper," she said, her own voice sounding rusty and foreign to her ears. "It's me." There was a pause, a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Jasper Flint, the silver-haired, impeccably dressed head of Vanderbilt Legal, had been her father's closest confidant and had managed her family's affairs with unwavering loyalty for over 30 years. He was more of a father to her than her own had ever been. Maeve, he finally breathed, the name a mixture of shock, relief, and deep, unspoken concern. "My dear girl, are you all right?" "No," she said, the single word conveying a world of pain. "I'm not. But I'm going to be. She took a deep breath, the air in the sterile house feeling charged with a new energy. Jasper, I'm coming back. I want you to execute Protocol Alpha. Immediately. Protocol Alpha, the code name they had devised years ago for the unwinding of the blind trust and the full reinstatement of her legal identity and financial power. It was the emergency button, the glass to be broken in case of catastrophe. Consider it done, Jasper said, his voice instantly shifting from concerned guardian to ruthlessly efficient executive. A car will be at your location in 1 hour. We have the penthouse at the Mandarin Oriental in New York prepared for you. Your security team is being mobilized as we speak. What are your immediate instructions? The house, she said, looking around the small suburban box that had been her cage. Sell it. Donate the contents to charity. I don't want to see a single thing from this life again. She paused, her gaze falling on the divorce papers still sitting on the dining table. And Jasper, I need you to find out everything there is to know about a man named Charles Rothschild and his private equity ventures. I also want a full dossier on his daughter Victoria and my husband, Rowan Black. I have a preliminary file on the Rothschilds already, Jasper said, his tone grim. Charles has been trying to make inroads against Vancorp Shipping for years. This is not a coincidence, Maeve. It seems your husband was poached. Poached, like a prize asset. The clinical business term was somehow more insulting than any emotional betrayal. She wasn't just left, she was strategically eliminated. I understand, she said, her voice hardening. One more thing, Jasper. The divorce papers. Don't let Rowan's lawyer file them. You will handle the proceedings. With pleasure, Jasper said, a hint of steel in his voice. We will be filing on the grounds of adultery and fraud. His petition will be buried. He won't know what hit him. An hour later, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom, a car so out of place in Dedham it might as well have been a spaceship, purred to a stop at her curb. A man in a sharp suit, her new head of security, opened the door for her. As Maeve slid into the plush leather interior, she took one last look at the house, at the quiet street, at the life that was now nothing more than a bad dream. She didn't look back again. As the car sped towards the private airfield where a Vancorp jet was waiting, Maeve's phone, a new top-of-the-line satellite model provided by her security, buzzed to life. It was an encrypted message from Jasper. Attached was a single document, the Vancorp Holdings summary. Line after line of incomprehensible numbers, company names, and market values that stretched into the billions. At the bottom was the net worth of the estate she now fully controlled, $217.4 billion. She stared at the number not with glee or with triumph, but with a chilling sense of purpose. Rowan had left her for a woman with resources. He had belittled her for having nothing. He had built his future on the foundation of her supposed poverty. He wanted to play in the big leagues. She was about to show him that he wasn't even in the same sport. The penniless orphan was dead. Maeve Vanderbilt, the billionaire titan of industry, was back from the ashes. And she was coming to collect on a 7-year debt of pain and humiliation, with interest. The transformation from Maeve Black, the suburban wife, to Maeve Vanderbilt, the formidable CEO, was swift and absolute. It began the moment she stepped onto the tarmac at Teterboro Airport and into the rarefied air of her old life. The penthouse at the Mandarin Oriental, overlooking the sprawling majesty of Central Park, was her chrysalis. It was a world of silent, efficient staff, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the ambient hum of immense power. Jasper Flint was waiting for her, standing beside a large mahogany table covered in files and electronic tablets. He looked older than she remembered, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence and unwavering loyalty. He didn't hug her or offer platitudes. He simply gave her a small, respectful nod. "Welcome back, Miss Vanderbilt," he said. The title, so foreign for so long, settled on her like a perfectly tailored suit. "It's good to be back, Jasper." The first few days were a whirlwind of intensive briefings. She was a quick study, her mind, so long occupied with trivial domesticities, proving to be as sharp and analytical as her father's. She absorbed 7 years of market fluctuations, technological advancements, and corporate strategy with a ferocious appetite. She wasn't just catching up, she was preparing for war. The physical transformation ran in parallel. The simple, unassuming woman from Dedham was systematically erased. A team of New York's finest stylists, trainers, and nutritionists descended upon the penthouse. Her long, unstyled hair was cut into a chic, razor-sharp bob that framed her face and highlighted her high cheekbones. Her wardrobe of faded jeans and cotton sweaters was replaced by a curated collection of power suits from Tom Ford, elegant dresses from Dior, and dangerously high stilettos from Christian Louboutin. Her new uniform was armor. Each piece was chosen to project an aura of untouchable power and icy elegance. She learned to walk with a new posture, a straight-back confidence that commanded attention. The soft, gentle cadence of her speech was honed into a precise, measured tone that brooked no argument. Within a week, she was ready. Her reemergence was not to be a quiet affair. It was to be a statement. Jasper had arranged for an emergency meeting of the Vancorp Board of Directors, a collection of powerful, aging men who had grown comfortable in her absence, managing the empire under Jasper's steady hand, but without a true Vanderbilt at the helm. She strode into the Vancorp boardroom on the 80th floor of their Manhattan skyscraper, the click of her heels on the marble floor, the only sound in the cavernous room. All conversation stopped. The 12 board members, titans of industry in their own right, stared as if they had seen a ghost. They remembered a quiet, grief-stricken teenager. They were not prepared for the woman who stood before them now. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and steady as she took her place at the head of the table, her father's seat. "I apologize for my long absence. I was otherwise engaged. Rest assured, my sabbatical is now over." She didn't wait for their responses. She launched directly into a brilliant, ruthless analysis of the company's performance, pointing out missed opportunities, bloated divisions, and a lack of aggressive innovation. She laid out a new, audacious vision for Vancorp, one that involved a major push into sustainable energy and a strategic acquisition of a cutting-edge AI firm. She had their complete, undivided attention. The sleepy, complacent energy in the room had been replaced by a palpable tension, a mixture of fear and reluctant admiration. But her grand strategy had a more personal, more pointed objective. Finally, she said, her eyes sweeping across the room, "I've reviewed the file on Rothschild Banking's recent ventures. Their attempts to undermine our shipping logistics are amateurish, but persistent. It's time we sent a message." She brought up a new file on the large screen at the front of the room. It was a mid-sized, innovative logistics company called LogiNext. LogiNext has developed a predictive shipping algorithm that could revolutionize the industry, she explained. Rothschild has been trying to acquire them for the past 6 months. Their offer is currently stalled at $900 million. She paused, letting the information sink in. "This morning," she continued, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, "Vancorp submitted a competing bid for $1.5 billion, all cash. The deal will close by Friday." A murmur of shock and excitement went through the room. It was an aggressive, almost reckless move. It was a direct, public shot across the bow of Charles Rothschild. "Furthermore," Maeve said, her gaze turning to ice, "I've taken a look at Rothschild's new private equity firm. It's a vanity project for his daughter and her new associate." She let the word hang in the air. "They seem to be focusing their initial investments in the luxury hospitality sector." She clicked to another slide, this one detailing a portfolio of boutique hotels. "We will begin a systematic acquisition of key properties in every market they are targeting. We will outbid them, we will absorb their targets, and we will bleed their initial capital pool dry before they even sign their first deal. I want their venture to be a stillborn failure. Is that understood?" The board members, once skeptical, now looked at her with a newfound respect bordering on fear. This wasn't Richard Vanderbilt's daughter. This was a predator. As the meeting adjourned, Jasper stayed behind. "A bold re-entry, Maeve," he said, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "You've reminded them who is in charge." "I wasn't talking to them, Jasper," she said, staring out the window at the city below, a concrete jungle where only the strong survived. "I was talking to him." She knew the news of the LogiNext acquisition would hit the financial world like a thunderclap. Charles Rothschild would be furious, and Rowan, so proud of his new position, his new life, would be standing right in the blast radius. He wanted to be in the big leagues. She had just changed the rules of his game, and he didn't even know he was playing against her. 2 months passed. Rowan Black was living the life he had always dreamed of. He and Victoria Rothschild were the city's newest power couple. They had just moved into a sprawling Park Avenue penthouse, a wedding gift from her father. Rowan had a new title, Senior Vice President at Rothschild Private Equity, a corner office with a panoramic view of the city and a wardrobe of bespoke suits. He was finally, in his own mind, a success. Yet a shadow loomed over his new paradise. Their first major venture, a fund to acquire luxury boutique hotels, had been a spectacular failure. Every target they identified, every deal they pursued, was inexplicably snatched away at the last minute by an unseen, deep-pocketed competitor. Rumors on Wall Street whispered of a newly aggressive Vancorp, but the moves were so precise, so targeted, it felt personal. Charles Rothschild was bleeding capital and losing face, and the pressure was trickling down directly to Rowan. "It's a ghost," Charles had snarled at him in a board meeting. "Someone is playing with us, and you, with your fancy Harvard degree, can't seem to figure out who." Tonight, however, was meant to be a reprieve, a celebration of their status. It was the annual Starlight Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the absolute pinnacle of New York's social calendar. For Rowan, this was his true arrival. He stood beside Victoria, her neck dripping with Rothschild diamonds, basking in the flash of cameras and the sycophantic greetings of the city's elite. He felt a rush of vindication. This was where he belonged. He thought for a fleeting moment of Maeve. He imagined her in her small house in Dedham, probably watching some cheap television show, completely oblivious to the glittering world he now inhabited. The thought filled him with a smug satisfaction. He had made the right choice. The grand doors to the Temple of Dendur exhibit, where the main dinner was being held, swung open. A hush fell over the crowd, a sudden collective intake of breath. The sea of famous faces parted as a new figure made her entrance. She wore a gown of shimmering, midnight blue silk that clung to her like a second skin. A single, breathtaking diamond necklace, the legendary Vanderbilt star, rested on her collarbone, catching the light and scattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Her black hair was styled in an immaculate, sharp bob, and her eyes, cool and calculating, swept across the room, missing nothing. She was flanked by two men, the venerable Jasper Flint and Kato Tanaka, the brilliant and reclusive CEO of a rival tech empire, a man who rarely made public appearances. Her presence radiated an almost gravitational pull of power and influence. Rowan's champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. His blood ran cold. The face was familiar, but the woman was an impossibility. It was Maeve. But it wasn't. It was as if his quiet, simple wife had been possessed by the spirit of a vengeful goddess. "Who is that?" Victoria hissed beside him, her voice tight with jealousy and intrigue. "I've never seen her before." A portly, red-faced banker nearby, a man who had been fawning over them moments before, chuckled nervously. "You've been out of the country too much, Victoria. That's not just anyone. That's Maeve Vanderbilt." The name hit Rowan like a physical blow. Vanderbilt, Vancorp, the ghost in the machine that had been systematically dismantling his professional life. It couldn't be. It was a joke, a nightmare. "Vanderbilt?" Victoria repeated, her perfectly plucked eyebrows shooting up. "The Maeve Vanderbilt? I thought she was a recluse, a ghost." "Well," the banker said, his eyes glued to the approaching trio. "The ghost is back, and apparently she's friends with Kaito Tanaka. They're rumored to be working on a merger. Can you imagine? Vancorp and Tanaka Industries? They could buy God." Rowan felt the blood drain from his face. His carefully constructed world was tilting on its axis. All the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The failed hotel deals, the Loginext acquisition, the inexplicable, personal nature of the attacks on Rothschild. It had all been her. As if sensing his gaze, Maeve's eyes met his across the crowded room. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of their shared past. Her look was one of utter indifference, the kind one might give to a piece of furniture or a particularly uninteresting insect. That look was more devastating than any scream or accusation could ever have been. It told him that he was nothing to her. She, Kaido, and Jasper moved through the room, a vortex of power. People Rowan had been desperate to impress were now falling over themselves to get a moment of her time. Charles Rothschild, Victoria's formidable father, approached Maeve with a strained, obsequious smile. "Ms. Vanderbilt," Charles said, his voice oozing a false cordiality. "A pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Charles Rothschild." Maeve extended a cool, gloved hand. "Mr. Rothschild, I've been following your recent difficulties in the market. Most unfortunate." Her voice was pure silk, but the words were pure venom. Charles's face tightened. "Indeed, we seem to have a rather aggressive new player to contend with." "Aggression is simply another word for efficiency," Maeve replied smoothly, before turning her full attention to Kaito Tanaka, dismissing the Rothschild patriarch as if he were a junior associate. Victoria watched, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. She turned on Rowan, her voice a venomous whisper. "You know her, don't you? How do you know Maeve Vanderbilt?" Rowan couldn't speak. His throat was dry. His mind was a chaotic symphony of denial and terror. Victoria's eyes narrowed, a shrewd, calculating light entering them. She looked from Rowan's ashen face to the magnificent figure of Maeve Vanderbilt, and then back again. A slow, dawning horror spread across her features. "Oh my God," she breathed, the realization hitting her. "She's your ex-wife. The poor, pathetic orphan you told me about. That was her." Rowan could only nod, a single jerky movement. The smug satisfaction he had felt just minutes before had curdled into abject terror. He hadn't just divorced a simple woman from the suburbs. He had betrayed, humiliated, and discarded the single most powerful woman in the room. He had thought he was climbing a ladder. Instead, he had just leapt off a cliff, and he was only just beginning to realize how far he had to fall. In the weeks following the gala, Rowan's life unraveled with brutal speed. The name Vanderbilt was a death knell to his career at Rothschild. Charles, humiliated and furious, treated him with open contempt. Victoria, seeing him now not as a prize but as the world's biggest fool, was cold and distant, their relationship reduced to a series of bitter, whispered arguments in their cavernous, silent penthouse. The social invitations dried up. The fawning colleagues now avoided his gaze. He was a pariah, a walking cautionary tale. Maeve, meanwhile, operated from a sphere so far above him, he could only watch the fallout. She was a fixture in the financial news, a supernova of industry. The Vancorp-Tanaka Industries merger was being hailed as the deal of the century, creating a global behemoth that dwarfed all competitors. Her every move was precise, strategic, and devastatingly effective. But amidst the corporate warfare and financial machinations, Maeve found herself feeling empty. The revenge, while satisfying, was a hollow victory. She had dismantled Rowan's world, but it hadn't filled the void in her own. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, seeking refuge from her own thoughts, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went incognito to a small independent art gallery in Chelsea. Dressed in simple jeans, a cashmere sweater, and a baseball cap pulled low, she was no one. She was just a woman looking at art. The gallery was quiet, the air smelling of linseed oil and turpentine. The art was raw, powerful, and full of a desperate, beautiful energy. She was particularly drawn to a series of large, abstract canvases, chaotic swirls of black, white, and a defiant, electrifying blue. They spoke to the storm inside her own soul. "There's something, aren't they?" The voice, low and resonant, startled her. She turned to see a man standing beside her. He was tall, with kind, intelligent eyes and hands stained with paint. He wore a paint-splattered t-shirt and worn-out jeans. He looked at the paintings, not her, a look of profound understanding on his face. "They're honest," Maeve replied, the word surprising her. "That's him," the man said, nodding towards a figure in the corner, the artist, who was talking animatedly with a potential buyer. Liam O'Connell, he paints like he's trying to fight his way out of a locked room, all passion and fury. The man finally turned his gaze to her, a warm, genuine smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. I'm the owner. Daniel. Daniel Murphy. Maeve, caught off guard, introduced herself simply as Ellie. For the next hour, Daniel walked her through the gallery, speaking about the art not with the pretentious jargon of the high art world, but with a simple, heartfelt passion. He saw the story in every brushstroke, the emotion behind every color choice. He didn't ask her what she did, where she lived, or who she knew. He just talked to her about art. She felt a part of herself she thought was long dead begin to stir. It was the art history student from Harvard, the young woman who had been captivated by beauty and creation, not balance sheets and market caps. She found herself returning to the gallery several times over the next few weeks. She and Daniel developed an easy rapport. Their conversations drifted from art to books, to music, to the simple absurdities of life in New York. With him, she wasn't a Vanderbilt. She was just Ellie, a woman with a keen eye and a quiet sadness he didn't pry into. He was a welcome anchor in the turbulent sea of her new life. Meanwhile, a new unexpected player entered the game. Kaido Tanaka, her new business partner, was not the cold, reclusive genius the media portrayed him to be. In their private meetings, she discovered a man with a dry wit, a fierce intellect, and an almost unnerving ability to see through her carefully constructed armor. During a late-night strategy session in the Vancorp boardroom, as they finalized the details of the merger, he suddenly paused, looking at her over the rim of his teacup. "You've enjoyed this, haven't you?" he asked, his dark eyes intense. "Dismantling Rothschild, humiliating your ex-husband." Maeve stiffened. It was a necessary business strategy. Kaido allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "Of course, but revenge is a fire that consumes the person who wields it, Miss Vanderbilt. It will warm you for a time, but eventually you will be left with nothing but ashes." He set his cup down. "Charles Rothschild is an old fool. Your husband is an insignificant parasite. They are not worthy of the energy you are expending on them. This company, our company, that is worthy of your energy. The future we can build is worthy of it." His words struck a chord deep within her. He wasn't judging her. He was challenging her. He saw her not as a weapon of vengeance, but as a brilliant leader, and he was calling her to be better. He was the first person in her new life to speak of the future, not the past. "What do you propose?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I propose we stop playing defense," he said, his eyes gleaming with a new intensity. "Let's build something revolutionary. Let's focus our resources on the new sustainable energy division. Let's create something that will change the world, not just settle old scores. That is a victory worthy of a Vanderbilt and a Tanaka." It was a turning point. Kaido's challenge, combined with the simple human connection she was finding with Daniel at the art gallery, began to shift her perspective. The rage that had fueled her was beginning to cool, replaced by a new, more compelling ambition. She had proven she could destroy. Now she was starting to wonder if she could build again. The war against Rowan and the Rothschilds was won, but the battle for her own soul, for the woman she wanted to become, was just beginning. And for the first time, she felt she didn't have to fight it alone. She had found allies not in bankers and lawyers, but in an artist's quiet gallery and across a boardroom table from a man who saw her future, not just her past. Rowan Black's free fall was swift and brutal. Fired from Rothschild, he became toxic on Wall Street. His lavish lifestyle evaporated after a venomous annulment from Victoria, which even forced him to legally change his name to sever ties with her family. Broke and stripped of his identity, he moved into a dingy Queens apartment where his ambition festered into a dangerous obsession. In his twisted logic, Maeve owed him for awakening her, and he convinced himself he could still get her back. He began a campaign of pathetic harassment, dozens of pleading, then menacing emails and voicemails, all intercepted by Jasper's team. When his messages went unanswered, his desperation pushed him to stalk her. One evening, he bypassed security, confronting her in the private elevator bay as she left with Kaido Tanaka. "Maeve!" he cried, his appearance disheveled, his eyes wild. She looked at the hollowed-out shell of the man she had married. Rowan, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, you need to stop this. Stop this? He laughed hysterically. I'm just getting started. You think you can ruin me and walk away? I know the real you, the scared woman playing dress up. This isn't you. Kaito stepped forward slightly. I think you should leave. Rowan's gaze filled with hatred. And who are you? Her new pet? Maeve cut him off, her voice like ice. He's my partner, Rowan. Something you never were. She turned and walked away without a second glance. The public rejection pushed him over the edge. If he couldn't have her, he would destroy her. He sold a twisted, fabricated story to a notorious tabloid journalist, Marco Finch, painting himself as the victim of a manipulative, mentally unstable heiress. She hid her billions to trap an unsuspecting husband. The headline screamed, the story filled with intimate, distorted details designed to lend it credibility. Simultaneously, Charles Rothschild, seeking revenge, fed damaging stories to the financial press, questioning Maeve's stability and fitness to run a global empire. The combined assault was a perfect storm. Vancorp's stock took a minor hit, and whispers about Maeve's sanity started on trading floors. She was in a meeting with Jasper and Kaito when the news broke. Jasper was apoplectic, planning a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. Maeve, however, was unnervingly calm as she read the article. Inside, the cold rage from the night Rowan left her solidified. He had weaponized their intimacy, twisting the life she built from love into something pathological. Don't sue them, Jasper, she said quietly. Maeve, we must, he insisted. We can't let this stand. No, she said, her eyes blazing with a dangerous new light. A lawsuit is a battle. He's declared a war, and in a war you don't file paperwork. You demand an unconditional surrender. She turned to Kaito, a chilling smile on her face. He thinks he can control the narrative by exposing our past. He's forgotten one detail. I know all of his secrets too, and unlike him, I have the receipts. The time for reacting was over. Rowan and Rothschild had pushed her too far, mistaking her restraint for weakness. Now she would show them what true power looked like. She would end this not by winning, but by annihilating them completely. Maeve's counterattack was not a single explosive event, but a masterfully orchestrated symphony of destruction. It began quietly. She unleashed the full, terrifying power of Vancorp's legal and intelligence divisions, the teams Jasper Flint had kept honed to a razor's edge. Their first target was Marco Finch and his tabloid. Within days, Vancorp investigators had unearthed a career's worth of corruption. Jasper didn't file a lawsuit. He hand-delivered the entire damning file to the district attorney's office. Finch was arrested, and the story he had written about Maeve was publicly discredited. Next, she turned her attention to Charles Rothschild. While he had been busy planting stories about her instability, Maeve's team had been conducting a deep-dive forensic audit into Rothschild Banking's entire operation. They found a pattern of insider trading and fraud. The evidence was irrefutable. Jasper Flint arranged a private meeting with the Rothschild board, pointedly excluding Charles. He laid out the evidence, explaining that Vancorp now held a controlling interest in Rothschild's debt. The message was clear. Either Charles Rothschild was removed, or Vancorp would release the evidence and call in its debt, an act that would vaporize the Rothschild legacy. Within 24 hours, the board announced Charles was stepping down due to health reasons. His attack on Maeve had cost him his empire. The final piece of her strategy was reserved for Rowan. It was to be the most public and devastating blow of all. She agreed to her first ever televised interview with Sarah Jensen, a legendary journalist known for her tough questioning. The interview was broadcast live, prime time. Maeve walked out looking serene and powerful in a simple white dress. For the first half, she spoke eloquently about her vision for Vancorp. Then Jensen shifted gears. Ms. Vanderbilt, I have to ask you about the recent, very public attacks on your character. Your ex-husband, Rowan Black, has made some very serious allegations. Maeve looked directly into the camera, her expression one of sad resolve. He did, she said calmly. Rowan and I were married for 7 years. At his request, I lived a life separate from my family's resources. I did this because I was in love. The story he told was a painful, twisted version of our life. But what he failed to mention was the reason our marriage ended. From a folder, she produced a sworn affidavit detailing Rowan's affair with Victoria Rothschild, which began more than a year before their divorce. She then produced emails between Rowan and Charles Rothschild, outlining the plan to trade his penniless wife for a senior position at the firm. "He didn't just leave me," Maeve stated. "He sold me." The control room was in stunned silence, but she wasn't finished. "Mr. Black has accused me of ruining him. The truth is, he was never the man he pretended to be." She slid his old credit card statements across the table. "These detail thousands of dollars spent on luxury goods, while he told me we couldn't afford to fix a leak in our roof. And this," she held up one last sheet, "is his application to Harvard, where he lied about being an orphan long before he met me. Rowan Black's entire life has been one calculated fraud." She looked back at the camera, her eyes clear. "I did not destroy that man. I simply held up a mirror. My only fault was in loving someone incapable of loving anyone but himself. I've paid the price for that mistake, and now so has he." She ended the interview by announcing the launch of the Vanderbilt Foundation, a $2 billion trust to support victims of emotional and financial abuse. In his Queens apartment, Rowan watched his world crumble. She had exposed him completely. The reckoning was final. In the aftermath, the world saw Maeve as a paragon of strength. Vancorp's stock soared. Rowan, a social leper, disappeared, rumored to be working a menial job in the Midwest, a ghost of his own ambitions. Maeve's life, for the first time, was truly her own. The rage had subsided, leaving peace. The empire was no longer a burden, but a tool to innovate and build. Under her and Kaito Tanaka's leadership, the newly merged Vancorp Tanaka Industries became a global leader in sustainable technology. Her work was her passion, a legacy that would dwarf the petty dramas of her past. Her partnership with Kaito was one of deep mutual respect and shared vision, but it was outside the boardroom that she found the quiet joy that had so long eluded her. She continued her visits to Daniel Murphy's art gallery, always as Ellie. He remained a grounding force, drawn to her quiet intelligence and resilient spirit, knowing nothing of her immense power. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after her return, they were walking through Central Park. "You seem lighter," Daniel observed. Maeve smiled. "I feel lighter. There's something I need to tell you. My name isn't Ellie." She told him everything. The Vanderbilt name, the hidden life, the betrayal, the comeback. Daniel listened patiently. When she finished, a long silence stretched between them. "So," he finally said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "does this mean I have to start calling you Miss Vanderbilt?" Maeve laughed, a sound of pure relief. "I'd prefer Maeve." "Well, Maeve," he said, his eyes twinkling, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Now, are you going to finish that coffee, or are you going to use your billions to buy the entire cart?" In that moment, standing in the heart of the city she now commanded, she felt a profound sense of completion. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged not just victorious, but whole. She was surrounded by people who saw her for who she truly was. Kaito, who respected her mind. Daniel, who cherished her spirit. She had lost a fantasy built on a lie, but she had gained something infinitely more valuable, a reality of her own making. The hidden heiress was gone for good, replaced by a woman who stood proudly in the light, the master of her own vast, brilliant, and limitless horizon. She was betrayed, broken, and left with nothing. Or so he thought. Maeve Vanderbilt's incredible journey from a hidden wife to a billionaire powerhouse is a testament to the unshakable strength of a woman scorned. She didn't just get even, she rewrote the entire game. Her story proves that your past does not define you, and the deepest betrayals can forge the most powerful versions of ourselves. She took her pain and turned it into a global empire, and her heartbreak into a beacon of hope for others. If her story of resilience and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Let us know in the comments what you think of Maeve's epic comeback.